The Locked On Podcast Network presents the College Sports Big 3 in 30. The three biggest stories in college sports. From our local experts at the Locked On Podcast Network. We bring you the real story, why it matters, what's next, who wins the big game, and more, all in 30 minutes. The College Sports Big 3 in 30 starts now with the biggest story in college sports.
Reports are saying Johni Broomne will miss multiple practices.
You are Locked On Auburn, your daily podcast on the Auburn Tigers.
Bruce Pearl tells CBS Sports that Johni Broomne is going to miss multiple practices leading up to hopefully his return to practice on Thursday. Obviously, the headlines are scary. Johni Broomne to miss time and all of that. Maybe I'm booging too hard. I just don't think it matters. Would I rather him practice than not? Sure, of course. But the fact that he came back into the basketball game on Sunday told me all I needed to know.
Yeah, I'm not worried at all. First of all, this time of year, to me, rest and revitalization is more important than repetition.
Yeah.
Those two R's trump the other R. If you don't know what you're doing through walkthroughs and running sets and plays at this point in the game, I saw Stephen Pearl get interviewed on a show, and he made light of it. He said, look, it's more important that he rehabs and gets rest than doing a walkthrough of stuff that he knows mentally anyway. And then he joked and said, he needs to rehab all 7 of those injuries that he got on one play. You don't make light of that and laugh about it. And the second thing is, you definitely want him practicing in San Antonio with unfamiliar rims.
Correct.
Much more important than practicing Tuesday and Wednesday in Auburn, where you've played 100-something games.
Yeah. And so he expects to be back on Thursday. And so it'll be a lot of on-court stuff for preparing for Saturday. Saturday, obviously for the Final Four there. So, I mean, what can happen in the meantime? I guess, maybe it's more reps for Johni, because I do think there's a chance, you just never know if an injury rears its ugly head, which would be devastating for Auburn. But I guess you need to prepare Johni as if the worst could possibly happen. And so maybe use those 2 days where Johni is just rehabbing and resting and focusing all on Johni Johnson, or maybe extra on Johni Johnson. That's my takeaway. That's my guess.
Well, and you got to think about it. A lot of times people try to associate the importance of a basketball practice with a football practice. All practices are important, but in football, you're game planning, you're scheming, you're running plays. Basketball is very drill centric. You're shooting free throws.
Great point.
You're running your sets, but you're not running, plays or now there might be some defensive things that you're working on to combat what Florida does. But it's a lot of drills and shooting, and by God, it better be free throws, stuff like that. And so it's, again, football is, let's game plan. Let's get the game plan in for our opponent. Let's run our plays that we're going to run. You know how it is in football. Don't you believe that a lot of these teams, Zach, run the first 15 plays are scripted in any game? Sure. So I like that in basketball. You can't script crap in basketball. It just happens. So it's not as important. And again, I'd much rather him practice after some rest on San Antonio's court than Auburn's, where he's so very familiar.
Yeah. I mean, just all of do you agree with me that the fact that he came back in on Sunday makes it matter less? Now, if he doesn't come back in and Auburn holds on and they still take down the Spartans and head to the Final Four, but there was no return of Johni, and then these reports come out he's going to miss practice, I think then it's more dire. But the fact is, he did come back in and he was effective on the boards. He made his 3. And then you saw all these videos of him doing stuff at Tumors and the team dressing or, dancing on the bus with the trophy and all that. I don't know. I'm just not worried about it.
I saw him favor it a little bit, around Tumors Corner. Yeah. But let me define favor. When people tried to high five him, you never know how hard somebody's going to high five you. Some Yahoo that's all excited, he would high five with his left hand, but he's holding up his phone like this with his right hand,
right,
very comfortably filming. Yeah. So look, in this day and age of modern medicine.
And to me, that's when it would start to hurt. A few hours after the game, when the adrenaline dies down, like that's when it starts to hurt you a little bit. And the fact that he was out there and doing all that, I don't know, man. They definitely need to be they definitely need to sit him out. No question. 100% agree with that decision. I'm just not worried about it.
Agree 100%. And any injury that he's had, whether it was that shoulder, whether it was that ankle, remember, it's all about rehab. There's been no surgery this year, nothing.
Do you think this impacts Florida's game plan at all?
No, I think Florida's fully game planning for Johni Broomne to play his customary 30 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think that I'm going to say target Johni Broomne, but not in the way that maybe we saw Alabama target a few of our players this year?
They're going to target him. They got some bigs that are very physical. Okay. The Hauk, I guess that's how you pronounce his name, and the Condon and the other big kid that got hurt against
They got
Auburn.
some dudes.
They can just rotate bigs to pound on him. You know what I'm saying? Rotate him in because they got three that can do it. So they're going to be physical with him. There's no doubt. And he needs to be prepared mentally for that as well.
I'm sure he sees it coming, and I'm sure they're telling him that over and over and over again. If I was Florida, I'd go right at him. I'd go right at him on both sides of the court. Just let's see. Like, you're probably healthy, but I'm still going right at you.
You can limit some of that and protect him somewhat on the offensive end, where you put him on the floor and what sets you run. Like if you bring him outside on the perimeter.
Yeah.
But defensively, you can't hide him. I mean, he's going to be in the paint and they can go right at him. But like I said, offensively, you can run some sets where you kind of get him away from traffic and get him away from the physicality of it.
Yeah. And the defensive side of Johni Broomne's game, I think, is the more safe side of it. I think if the injury is going to impact him at all, I think it'll be on the offensive side of the floor.
Yeah, we saw that with the ankle. It was lift. He would throw that shot up real quick, and there wasn't any lift to it. I think the lift has come back a little bit. Now let's see what happens with rebounding. Banging inside, that kind of thing, when they're mixing it up a little bit. Because Auburn needs him to rebound. I mean, he's a double machine, and there's a reason why he is. And so you count on him
in just the first half, by the way.
Yes, and you count on him to get you 10 to 12 boards a game, and if he can't, you're going to have to get those rebounds from somewhere else against a very potent front line.
No question. So Johni Broomne to miss time, according to reports, according to Bruce Pearl directly. Let's take a deep breath. I think it's fine.
March Madness is almost over, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and even who's cutting down the nets. The FanDuel app is simple to use, and when I win, I get paid instantly. No waiting around. Check out some NBA games while you're at it. The Pistons have a tough Western Conference matchup with the Thunder. FanDuel has the Thunder favored by 15. Visit FanDuel.com and get in on all the hoops action.
If the Florida Gators figure these things out, well, my God, they just might win a national championship.
You are Locked On Gators, your daily podcast on the Florida Gators.
I wanted to make sure that everybody understands this. I phrased this the way that I phrase this. I said if Florida does these things, they can win a national championship, because while what I'm talking about is relevant to the Auburn game this Saturday, it is also applied to if Florida beats Auburn, then they need to do these things against either Duke or Houston, right? And for me, one of the biggest things that I've been harping on and that I've been very frustrated with lately, and that I've been talking about a lot, is that Florida needs to figure out what the hell is going on with their defensive rebounding. And it's been since the start of the SEC tournament that I've been complaining about it, right? It's been a thing that happened here and there throughout the entirety of the season, but it feels like, especially lately, their defensive rebounding has taken a dip, right? You look at the Missouri game in the SEC tournament is one that I mentioned frequently because Florida had the size advantage that entire time and lost. And by lost, I don't mean obviously that they were out-rebounded in it, but that they had a subpar performance on the defensive glass against Missouri. I mean, Missouri had 18 offensive rebounds against Florida. Florida had 23 defensive rebounds. That means that Missouri had 18 rebounds on those looks, and it was just bad, right? Bad. I mean, that's a 44% offensive rebounding percentage. That's not something that should happen, right? You look at the game against Texas Tech, and Texas Tech had a 31% offensive rebounding percentage. You look at the game against Maryland, that was the game where Florida actually just dominated the boards. Like that's what we need to see, more of that. But you look at the total regular season, right? From game 1 all the way through the regular season, Florida allowed 9.6, and we're going to throw numbers at you just so you know. Florida allowed 9.6 offensive rebounds per game while getting 21.7 defensive rebounds per game. That's an offensive rebounding percentage allowed of 26.16%. Okay, that's pretty good. Okay, I'm not going to sugarcoat a damn thing. That's pretty good to allow that low a percentage, 26.16%. Conference play. So this is from the start of SEC play through the regular season. Allowed 9.7 offensive rebounds per game. Basically the same, right? Went from 9.6 to 9.7 while getting 25.4 defensive rebounds per game. So a rebound and a half less defensively. Okay. That's an offensive rebounding percentage of 26.7%. That's a jump. Again, this is one of those things that we talk about where when we talk about percentages with this team and we talk about percentages for this Florida Gators basketball team and throughout the course of a season or throughout the course of a single game, it adds up, right? A 1% difference or a 1.5% difference in one game really might mean nothing, right? But it's over the course of the season, and averages are averages because they usually average out. Who'd have thought? So that means that there's some games where that difference is larger and some games where it's smaller. That's how averages are working. But that climb over the course of a season, over the course of the conference play, not a good climb, right? You look at the SEC tournament, and Florida allowed 9.3 offensive rebounds per game. Okay? So allowing 9.3 offensive rebounds per game, that's less offensive rebounds per game than they allowed. They only got 24 defensive rebounds per game. That's an offensive rebound percentage allowed of 28%. So again, a slight uptick from the start or from regular season to the SEC tournament, slight uptick from 26.7% to 28%. And again, I know we're talking percentages and some people get annoyed by that, but context matters on things, which we will talk about in a second. In the NCAA tournament so far, in March Madness, Florida has allowed 11.5 offensive rebounds per game. 2 more offensive rebounds per game than usual. Okay? They get 25 defensive rebounds per game. 1 more defensive rebound per game than the SEC tournament, right? So they're allowing, well, compared to the regular season, they're allowing 2 more offensive rebounds while getting 2 less defensive rebounds. Okay? In the NCAA tournament, they are allowing an offensive rebounding percentage of 31.5%. That's bad, okay? Allowing an offensive rebounding percentage of 31.5% would have Florida, again, if that was over the course of the entire season, that would have Florida ranked 263rd in the country. 263rd in the country right now. That's where they would be. And I need that to be made very clear because that's where it is. Also, by the way, in the tournament remaining, Auburn is the only team that's worse at allowing those than Florida. But that 31.5%, again, is horrible right now, what they're allowing. That across the entire of the country and across the MEAC, across the worst conferences. I mentioned the MEAC because Florida played Norfolk State, so that's relevant. That's statistically relevant. But against even the lowest level, that would be in the 260s. That's a horrible percentage to allow. Okay? That they're allowing 31.5% right now. Horrible. And again, context matters, right? prior to conference play, they played worse teams. Makes sense. They should dominate on the boards. But right now, because it's gotten worse as they've gone on, it's gotten worse throughout the course of the season. Right now, that's where it adds up. Right? Like averages are the averages. But when you're facing a team like Auburn, who you're going to face this weekend, and again, you're not doing a good job protecting the defensive, you're not doing a good job protecting defensive rebounding. Auburn, a pretty good offensive rebounding team. Not as good as Florida, of course. Florida is the 5th best offensive rebounding team in the country and the first remaining, like the best remaining. But Auburn, pretty good at it. They're going to hurt you. Houston, really good at it. Houston is almost as good as Florida when it comes to getting offensive rebounds. So if you do play Houston, that's going to suck. That's going to hurt, right? Like they're really good at it. It adds up, and you're at a time where it's all about winning within the margins, right? And that's why I understand, like I've seen people say that they hate the usage of numbers. First off, not bad to have more information, okay? But also, the Final Four and the national championship, they come down to winning within the margins oftentimes, right? Because especially right now, we're talking about a historic Final Four. Just the second time where all 4 of the teams that made it are 1 seeds. Okay? All 4 of these teams are considered some of the best teams of all time on KenPom rankings. Okay? We're talking about the elite of the elite. You win within the margins. Okay? That's what it comes down to. The analytics are the analytics for a reason. The 4 factors, effective field goal percentage, turnover percentage, offensive rebound percentage, and free throw rate, are the 4 factors for a reason. They are important. And Florida right now is struggling in an important area. They're getting offensive rebounds at a good rate. That's absolutely true. Like, that's fine. They're good at that. But the flip side of that is to not allow opposing teams to get offensive rebounds. And right now, Florida's allowing that. On top of having some stretches where they're turning the ball over a bit. Those extra possessions add up. Those extra shot attempts add up. They haven't bitten you in the rear end yet, right? They haven't. And I don't care too much for talking about the field goal discrepancy between Florida and Texas Tech, because Florida shot way more free throws than Texas Tech, right? But Maryland, despite not being able to get offensive rebounds, because Florida turned the ball over so much, Maryland shot the ball more than Florida did, right? Like because of things like that adding up, it happens. Or sorry, the same amount. But again, free throws happened in that game. You look at the UConn game. UConn shot considerably more field goals than Florida did. You look at the Norfolk State game, and they shot more field goals than Florida did. It happens, right? It happens. But right now, you're losing in key areas where if you're having trouble with smaller teams and you're about to face some of these bigger teams, like Houston's the only small team left.
The NCAA tournament is here, and so is the bracket breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
You are Locked On Blue Devils, your daily podcast on the Duke Blue Devils. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Duke basketball in the Final Four, taking on Houston, a team that we saw in the Sweet 16 last year. Now we've got a chance to play them 2 rounds deeper in the Final Four for a chance to play in the national title game. It's the nation's top offense as of late in this Duke basketball team, the top defense as of late in Houston. Everybody's kind of fired up about the X's and O's and some of the big matchups that are set to be played in this one. What's the one thing that jumps out to you when you look at this game?
I mean, you got to start with Houston's defense. Number 1 in the country, and not by a small margin either. And they really do everything well. They have the 2nd best effective field goal percentage allowed. They're 5th best in protecting the 2-point area, 13th with 3-pointers. They've got the 5th best block percentage. 20th best turnover percentage. It's really hard to score on them. They don't have a lot of height maybe at the center position, but they're a big team, kind of 2 through 4 or 5, and they're just kind of interchangeable. A lot of like 6'8", 6'4" to 6'8" guys who can just really switch every position. They trap the ball screens hard, and they just make it almost impossible for you to execute your offense if you're not really crisp.
Without a doubt, which is why I think you look at the matchup that Duke's got with Malawach on the inside and then Cooper Flagg's size that he brings to the table, plus somebody like Pat Gamba, plus I think we're going to be a week further into kind of Malik Brown's return to play. Maybe he's got an added wrinkle for the Duke basketball team. Mason Gillis, a big player as well. He's been asked to do a lot in the post throughout the course of the season for this Duke team defensively. I think matchup-wise, we're going to be fine in that area as well.
Yeah, I mean, the size certainly does favor Duke, so that's a good thing. One thing to consider is that Houston is a really good offensive rebounding team.
Sure.
They're not maybe the most, appealing offense to watch, but they shoot the three really well and they get offensive rebounds. And so those are just two things to concern yourself with. They don't take a lot of threes. So I think if I'm Shire, my main emphasis on guarding them would be, you got to get the defensive board. And hopefully, Kaman and Gongba and all these guys that have a lot of size on them should be able to do that.
Yeah, I think the question just becomes at that point, if they're going to be relying on the three-point shot, we're again in a scenario like Alabama where those bigs are being pulled away from the basket. So you're asking more of your guards to go down and help in rebounding actions and that sort of thing. There are 2 teams left in the tournament that have 3 players in their starting backcourt that are shooting greater than 40% from three-point range right now. That's Duke and Houston. It's 2 teams set to go head-to-head against one another. So they've got guards that are able to do it as well. Houston just doesn't have a Cooper Flagg on the floor. And then when you look further into the numbers, they're not a good 2-point shooting team in the grand scheme of things. And so like we saw Duke run Alabama off the 3-point line, I think it's going to be equally as important in a game like this for Duke to run Houston off that 3-point line.
Yeah, and another thing that jumps out to me is they're not a big assist team. If you look at their assists versus field goals made, they're kind of down near the bottom of the country there. So that to me indicates they like to do a lot of stuff in isolation, but I think that could actually benefit us because of how good Duke's 2-point defense is. So you just run them off the line, make them beat you one-on-one, which we tend to do to teams by switching a lot, and hopefully just force them into some tough mid-range shots and win the math battle that way.
Yeah, I love winning math battles. That's what we've been doing a whole lot of this season.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. Especially in the tournament.
No doubt about that. I mean, the way that we've been playing and kind of the margins that we've had, the math's not been good for Duke's opponents. So I hope that continues. Looking at Duke offensively, though, to get into that a little bit more, because we have been so effective. One, what are you seeing? Why do you think we've been able to be so effective offensively? And 2, what's it going to take to kind of replicate that going into a game like this?
It's something that's really been ongoing for a couple months now. Duke had that period of time, kind of early middle of the season, when they were really struggling to score. But then at some point, I think it was really around the Stanford game, if you want to look at it, something just clicked, and all the ball movement and actions off of actions and all that stuff really started to pay dividends. And I know Shire said earlier in the year that he wasn't running a lot of stuff because he wanted to make sure the team could read and react instinctively. And I think that's what you're seeing right now. It's just, there's so many options, and the players seem to read those options so well and so quickly that it's just pretty impossible for an opponent to defend it. And you could see that in the tournament field goal percentage, 56% from the field, 47% from 3, just absurd efficiency. Had 2 60, 50, 80 games.
Yeah, the efficiency piece has been incredible. I know that there are going to be games, though, that's not the case. A Georgia Tech game, for example, in the ACC tournament, when you're not hitting anything and you're getting, that obviously is out there. That's a possibility when these games play out. And that would be the most unfortunate time should that happen in Saturday's Final Four game, or if Duke advances to a national championship game on Monday. But what I do like is the way that Duke has found other ways to win when the shots aren't falling from the outside, right? That they do have these added X factors, going to the rim, lobs at the rim, able to make the common shooting, 87%, 20 for 23 so far in the tournament. And I can think of 2 missed dunks that he's had, right? So there's 2 of the 3 misses that he's had already. That brings me a little bit more confidence in that, okay, maybe the shots aren't falling. We at least have seen this Duke team find other ways to go and score.
Yeah, Kaman's been just such an important pressure release valve for Duke all year, but really especially lately. I mean, you think about the Arizona and Alabama games. How many times did Cooper or Khan or Proctor or whoever get into the middle and just lob it up for Kaman? And it puts the opponent in an impossible position because they have to decide, do I step up to guard the layup here? Or do I sink back to guard Kaman? And especially with somebody like Khan Knipple, who's become such a good finisher, that's just like almost an automatic 2 points when Khan can get into the middle like that. And we'll see if he can do that against Houston because they're such a stout, impressive defense that they're going to want to take that away, and they'll have game planned for that.
Without a doubt. I mean, that's going to be a big thing to figure out how Houston decides to defend this Duke team. What is kind of their formula if they feel like is the best chance to win. The other thing I wanted to add with Duke and looking at the offense and listening to what Coach Shire has talked about, going back to Duke's early season and going back to those games against Kansas and Kentucky, I hear him talking about just not liking to go back and watch those games because to his eye, his basketball-loving brain, it just looks ugly to go back and watch. I think a lot of that goes to the possessions that Duke was able to have, the tempo that they were certainly playing with, and the way that Duke has been able to get up and down and run the floor a little bit, but have the perfect mix because we didn't turn it into a track meet against Alabama. We made sure we limited their possessions, but were able to get kind of the big, quick looks when the opportunity was there.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at Duke's tempo, really since about the Illinois game, it's kind of dramatically increased. You have 3, 4, 5 games, 6 games actually over 70 possessions. Earlier in the year, you only had 3 games total before that. And those were the first 3 games of the season. And then everything was in the 60s. So, there's an anomaly there. The Baylor game was only 59 possessions, but that's a lot of offensive rebounds. So that'll slow it down too. In terms of Alabama, I thought Duke played a little bit into Alabama's hand in the first half by playing pretty fast. Now, Duke still had the 9-point lead at the break. So great. You're good either way, but
still
I thought there was a little
point half. Yeah. Like
and then you see the second half, especially from like the 11-minute on mark to the end of the game, they really kind of took the air out of the ball and took Alabama out of their game. And I thought that was really smart because what Alabama wanted and needed to do, especially when you're down 20, is get some quick shots up.
Yeah. And in so many cases, I know that people get so terrified when that happens. Like, why are you slowing it down in this moment? My dad's one of the biggest, don't slow it down guys that's out there. But it worked. I mean, with this team, the IQ that they have, knowing they're still going to get the good looks, that was the right play to be made to make sure this happens. The last thing I want to make here, and looking at this upcoming weekend, an X factor that is not really controllable by Duke, but I do want to hear your commentary here. I felt like compared to the first weekend in the round of 64 and round of 32, the whistle was not going in Duke's favor in the Arizona or the Alabama game, which is totally out of the norm for a Duke basketball team when it comes to March Madness. So if there's a world in which, it maybe does sway back to Duke's, I'm not going to hate it. This Duke team, but I did find that really interesting, man, where this past weekend, it's like, man, there are some of these calls. I don't know what these refs are seeing, but it's really not going Duke's way.
Yeah, sometimes you just have to fight through that, and you have to kind of figure out on the fly how the game is being called. I didn't think Duke did a particularly good job of that against Arizona, which is why they ended up in foul trouble. That game was being called way too tightly for my taste. I thought Alabama was called a little bit better in the sense that it was a little freer. You hate when you're watching a game and just everybody's in foul trouble on both sides. And it just really, you're sending a lot of guys to the line. It's making the game less enjoyable to watch. It's making both teams not able to kind of roll out their ideal rosters the way they would. And, so I had a more of a gripe with that one. But against Alabama, there were still some mystifying calls. I thought Cooper got cheated out of 2 blocks. There was one that was called for a foul, and there was another that was called the goaltending, and they never showed the goaltending one on review. So maybe I'm wrong on that. But the rest did go look at it, of course, but the goaltending wasn't overturned. And then the other one, it looked like a clean block on the replays.
Right.
Just little things like that I had gripes with.
And look, I hope that we don't have too many gripes once these games get closer and the margins get that much smaller and that sort of thing. So really excited to see it play out. Feeling good about Duke basketball going into this game against Houston in the Final Four. And hopefully we're going to be able to celebrate a national championship victory for this squad here.